don't believe in chance or coincidence. I believe in a God that orchestrates our ways. He orchestrates our steps. And God has led you here today because we need to be together, and that each of us individually needs to be here today. That's why. We need to be here. And I've used this analogy before, and I probably need to think of another one, but there's always water all around us. We just can't see it, but sometimes it all comes together and forms a raindrop when we can feel it and experience it. And, you know, God's presence is always around us, but sometimes there's just that special moment. There's just that special time in His presence, and I believe this is one of those times. I've pretty much cried all week. I'm a crier anyhow. We watched Wonka last night. Have you seen the new Wonka? Beautiful. I cried. Just touched me. More importantly, I had never met Ann before. We spoke on the phone one time, friends with the Holmes, and I invited her to be with them for Just Between Us. And I thought, well, let's seize this opportunity and have her come and share online, share on site, share at Just Between Us, share at the Wawa, share at the dollar store, share it everywhere. We seize this opportunity. And so we talked on the phone, and I just sensed immediately her spirit and her loving, kind, gentle spirit. And so I bought her book that God has used, and that book God used to change my life. I don't say that because I don't use the name of God flippantly, and I don't use it to manipulate or anything like that. That's using the Lord's name in vain. But I'm telling you, there are things in the book and what she shared this morning online that I'm going to carry with me the rest of my life, and I know that it's the same is going to happen to you. She's ready. She's prepared. She's been through so much that she can share firsthand of how God has helped her. The question becomes for us, are you ready? See, are you ready? Are you ready to receive all that God has for you today? I'm ready. I'm ready, and I hope you're ready as well. And Dalaba is coming at this time. She has dear friends and family with her. I'll allow her to take that part to introduce anyone that you want. But we're so thrilled to have you. I consider it an honor. I told you this before, but I want to say it again. I felt like as I read your book, just kneeling before God and sitting under the learning tree. And that I think your son had said this in a roundabout way in the book, that he's not going to allow the pain to be in vain. And he has used you, and he is using you, and he will continue to. All right, sorry. That's all.
Thank you.
God bless you, dear.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Randy for inviting me to speak at this service. And thank you to Rick and Ginny Pastor Rick and Ginny for inviting me to the Just Between Us. It gives purpose to my pain, to have opportunities to share about God. And so I'm really appreciative of that. I understand that I have friends, and I've seen one, Judy, but I understand that I have other friends that are here, and I hope I see you later on. It's so nice to see so many of you. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. And yes, I do want to chat with you all. And I'm very privileged to have my mom and my sister with me. My sister was my chauffeur to come here, and we drove all over Bridgeton yesterday because it's our old stomping grounds. And we went to get Jersey subs, which you can get Jersey subs in Michigan, but they're just not the same, you know? And so we got a Jersey sub, and then we went to Torigno's Bakery. So, yeah, okay, all right. Lots of sweet lovers like me. So today's message is going to be called His Light Gives Us Hope in Our Darkest Moment. Today's message will be pretty heavy. So I thought I'd share something light first. It's something from my own family. One day recently, my daughter-in-law, Kelsey, was singing, "I Trust in God." She must have said that a few times, "I trust in God." So Braden, my 6-year-old grandson, said, "What does that mean?" And Kelsey said, "It means that no matter what happens, you believe that God has a plan and that things will work out according to his will." So Braden says, "Oh yeah, I do that." And Kelsey said, "Nice, so how do you do that?" And he said, "I stop washing my hands after I pee. Now I only wash them after I poop." That's my family. That's my little grandson. And it takes great faith. It's a funny story about trusting God from a child's perspective, but the truth is, we all face difficulties that are hard to understand. And what is required of us is a blind faith. So Jesus told his disciples in John 16:33, and I don't know, you guys are used to PowerPoint, so I'll just read it. John 16:33, "Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world." When I was 12, I was actually called to be a pastor's wife. And I didn't go looking for guys who were going to be interested in ministry. I figured if God had that for me, then he was going to make that happen. And when so like 12 years after that, I met Kurt Dalaba, and we fell in love and got married in 1987. We were in ministry for 33 years together. And after we had our first child in 1989, Kurt felt a call to the mission field. Well, I had a hard time with that. So while Kurt went on a prayer walk, he'd been dealing with it for a while, but now I knew he was just going to get with God and get an answer once and for all. So he went on a prayer walk out in the woods somewhere, and I knew, I was dreading the outcome of that. So I decided that while my baby's napping, I'm going to iron. So I was just ironing, and I will be honest, the battle was raging in my heart, and I complained to God, "You told me that I'd be a pastor's wife. You said nothing about the mission field." And I heard his response clearly. And when God speaks to me, it's always in a few words, like a one little sentence or 2 words or whatever. And he said to me, "I called you to be Kurt's wife." And I knew what that meant, that wherever Kurt goes, I'm going with him. So Kurt was already a pastor when we met. He had been a children's pastor in Warren, Ohio for 7 years, an associate pastor in Germany, and an associate missionary in Germany, and a pastor at Good News Assembly in Bridgeton, New Jersey, and that's where I met him. Kurt was also an associate pastor for 2 years in Kalamazoo, and a missionary for 6 years in Germany, that's when I was with him, and an executive pastor of an international church in East Lansing, Michigan. And this church ended up we were there for 18 years, and this ended up being the highlight of our ministry, I will say that. It was a wonderful group of people that we were able to be with. And he was elected to the position, finally, of Secretary-Treasurer of the Michigan Ministry Network and an executive presbyter for Michigan for almost 6 years. I guess it's for the national office. Anyway, in July of 2020, after our 2nd and 3rd grandchild were born earlier that year, we were starting to make plans for his retirement. And in the midst of all that, he was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic chondrosarcoma. It's a very rare cancer that has no treatment or cure. But they'd offer to try the chemo. The oncologist says, "We are going to bring out the big guns." So I asked Kurt if he wanted to do this. I said, "Don't feel any pressure to do it for me. Do what you want." Because the oncologist had told us that he would only have 1 to 3 years at best, even with the chemo. And Kurt wanted to, because there's always the hope that God will still heal. And there's always the hope that maybe they'll come up with a new treatment. And so he wanted to fight it. And so we agreed. I can't begin to tell you what it feels like to get such a diagnosis. We were both in shock. As terrible and unreal as that moment was, it wasn't the darkest moment of my life. A worse day was coming. At this point, I still knew the next step to take. Elizabeth Elliot's quote is fitting in times like these. She said, "Sometimes life is so hard, you can only do the next thing. Whatever that is, just do the next thing, and God will meet you there." So we broke the news to our children. We called our prayer warriors to help us pray. We scheduled surgery to stabilize his leg because he hadn't been able to walk on it, and chemo to try to fight the cancer. I wanted to do everything I could to help him through this. We even had a prayer service in our home with our friends, and this was during the COVID time. This was 2020. And everyone was there with masks on, but we prayed over Kurt. At the end of September, about 2 months after that diagnosis, it was heart-wrenching to hear the doctor say, "I'm sorry, but the chemo never even touched the cancer. It failed. He has multiple lesions in his lungs now. There's nothing more we can do for your husband. If you want your children to see him while he can still hear them, you need to call them to come to the hospital today." Well, my daughter lived in Boston, so it wasn't going to be today. But I prayed that he would still be awake. As you can imagine, telling my children to come to the hospital because doctors had given up on their dad was the worst phone call I ever had to make. I could barely get the words out. Crazy as this may seem, this wasn't the darkest moment of my life. A worse day was coming. I still knew the next step to take: make Kurt comfortable, move him to palliative care so that we could all be together in one room during COVID. Otherwise, we'd have to take turns being in there. Pray because God might still heal him. It wasn't too late, and a miracle could still happen. Call a hospital chaplain to pray with our family. Help my children through this. They were facing something I didn't have to face until I was 60. When we were in our private room in palliative care that night, we were all exhausted. Since we'd been told that Kurt might live 1 or 2 more days, we fell asleep. At about 2 a.m, we woke up because the nurses came in to check on Kurt. When they left to get more medicine, my children and I gathered around his bed, and we began to sing hymns. We noticed that our singing and our nearness it pleased him. It had a calming effect on him. And so we prayed and sang some more. In the meantime, the nurse returned and watched him closely, and then she said, "Let me check him." His breathing had become shallow, and seconds later, we heard the words, "He's gone." Nothing is more final than when you see the breath of life has left a person's body. To see your loved one absolutely motionless causes you to realize that only a shell has remained. The person is no longer there. A few hours later, as I walked out of the hospital, leaving my husband's body behind, knowing he would never walk beside me again, my heart broke into a million pieces. But even this wasn't the darkest moment of my life. You see, I still knew the next step to take. I knew how to move forward. I needed to help my children through this grief. I needed to make funeral arrangements. There were so many details that needed my attention and decisions that had to be made. After the funeral, and after everyone returned to their lives and routines, my daughter and granddaughter stayed with me for 1 month. My sweet son-in-law was so understanding. He was the one who suggested that Amanda stay with me for a while longer. We grieved together, and it was hard, but it was so nice to have her with me. At the end of the month, I had to kiss them goodbye at the airport and then arrive home to my empty house. The next morning, I awoke alone, truly alone, for the first time since my husband died. We had bought this house when our children were 12 and 14 years old. We had hosted parties and events in our home all through my kids' adolescence, teens, and early 20s. Our home was the place where the young people hung out. We hosted our extended family, people from our church, people from all over the world, because we often opened our home to international students at Michigan State University, which is located in the same town as our church. All of that was gone now. I was the only one left in the house that was our family home. I felt like the last man standing, and it wasn't a good feeling. The loneliness was overwhelming. I forced myself to get up and get ready for the day. I went downstairs to make breakfast, but I only got as far as the breakfast room. I stood by the table with my hands on the back of the chair, and I stared out the window. I saw nothing. I'm sure it was light outside, but I remember only seeing darkness, as though I had entered a pitch dark room where it was too dark to even see my hand in front of my face. This was the darkest moment of my life. All hope was gone. Kurt could never be back. I couldn't see my way forward. I had no idea what I would do the next moment, let alone the next hour, day, week, month, or year. How could I live life without my husband and best friend beside me? I can't find the words to describe the utter devastation I felt at that moment. What I did next was what a lifetime of devotion to God had taught me. I went into the family room, fell on my knees by my couch, and I began praying through tears. All I said was, "Oh God, oh God." I had no other words, just, "Oh God." There was nothing more I could say. Not only did God hear me, in my darkest and most desperate moment, He answered. I heard Him clearly in my mind, and He said, "Trust me." I thought about His words for a few seconds. It's amazing how many thoughts can run through your minds in a mere seconds. And I thought, if I can't trust God, then who can I trust? He hadn't healed Kurt, but He was still the same God I had trusted all my life. My prayer changed, and I started saying, "I trust you, God. I trust you, God. I don't understand, but I trust you." And trusting God caused a faint light to appear in my dark room. Where I had seen nothing a moment ago, now I saw a dim light way off in the distance, as though I were in a dark tunnel. I had no idea how long it would take me to reach the light, but at least I knew in which direction to walk. On the darkest day of my life, I discovered that all I truly needed was God. I'd heard and taught others about trusting God many times for the course of my life, but now it was more real, more true than ever before. I'm sure we've all heard that our basic need is for food, water, air, and shelter. But the truth is, I had no appetite and no thirst. Sorry, lost my spot. On the darkest day of my life, no appetite and no thirst. Food and water were useless at that moment, since I wished I could die. Air and shelter didn't matter to me at all. So I would argue that our basic need is to trust God. He's the one who will give us the will to live and eat and drink. There are people in the Bible who reached their darkest moment of life too, and the one I want to focus on today is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Imagine what she felt when she saw her son beaten, abused, and barely recognizable, now hanging on a cross, and heard people mocking him. Her husband was gone, so she couldn't lean on him. Her children weren't there either, except for the one hanging on the cross. She was there alone. Her heart must have been absolutely crushed. I imagine her longing to run from the scene battled with her longing to stay near her son. She wouldn't abandon him. Not now, not ever, but it hurt so much to see him falsely accused. The amazing thing to me is that Jesus saw her, really saw her. Despite his pain and agony, he saw Mary, and he saw her broken heart and her need. While writhing in pain and agony, he instructed John to take care of her and not leave her alone. We see in John chapter 19, verses 26 and 27, where it says, "When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, 'Woman, here is your son,' and to the disciple, 'Here is your mother.' From that time on, this disciple took her into his home." If, in the midst of excruciating pain and near death, Jesus saw his mother's need and led her on a path that would be best for her, never doubt that when you arrive at your darkest moment of the darkest moment of your life, you can call out to God too. He will hear you and help you. You can trust him to show you the way forward. That's what he did for me. My call as a pastor's wife came to an end when my husband died. But God had another plan for me. I wouldn't even say another plan. His plan continued for me. I wasn't in some kind of plan B. I was still in plan A, and this was part of it. It wasn't what I wanted. My heart yearned for all I'd lost. But I chose to trust God, and he began opening doors for me. Isaiah 43:19 says, "For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. When things seem hopeless, God will make a way." Interestingly, my first instruction in how to move forward came from my husband about 2 weeks before he died. Since he wasn't improving, I had a weak moment when I asked him, if God doesn't answer our prayers like we're hoping, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And Kurt didn't even take time to think about it. It seemed as though the answer was on the tip of his tongue. Without a moment's hesitation, he said to me, "Go in the direction of your gift." God had spoken through him to me at that moment. His words gave me peace. About 3.5 months into my grief journey, I began blogging about my grief, not realizing that God would use this 2.5 years later to get me to write a book about grief. Writing is my gift. So that is what that's why I was able to do the blogging. It helped me to process my grief, to write about it, and to write about what God was doing in my heart. So anyway, that ended up being a book because people that were readers of my blog asked me to please put it in book format so that they can give it to their friends and family. So I rewrote it and made it in a book format, and then published the book Facing Tomorrow Without You, which I have here too if you are interested in buying any. I'd already published 2 books in the historical Christian romance genre and was halfway finished with the 3rd when Kurt died. So in keeping with Kurt's instruction to me to go in the direction of my gift, I continue working on that book, which I published about a year and several months after Kurt died. It helped me also through my grief process. I'm telling you, God was preparing me before my husband ever was diagnosed with cancer, because he knows what's best for us, and he knows the plans he has for us, and he will direct us on those paths. The really amazing thing that happened was 7 months into my grief journey, I got a phone call from Greg and Sandy Mundis, and I think many of you may know them, and I think they're personal friends of yours, because Sandy and I talked about me coming here, and she told me to give you a hug. So anyway, he was the director of the Assemblies of God World Missions at that time. He's retired now. Greg and Sandy were longtime friends of my husband and asked if I would consider being their ghostwriter for their book after Greg battled with COVID. So many of us had prayed for him, and God miraculously healed him. They wanted me to write the story. I couldn't believe it. I'd never done ghostwriting before. But I had told God, I think it was just maybe a couple months before that, I had told God, whatever door you open, I'm not going to close it. And so that went through my mind when they called me. So I had said that I would do it, and last year we published Patient Number 1, and if you haven't read it, it's a truly wonderful faith-building story. Greg should never have survived. In short, doctors in Springfield, Missouri had given up on him. He was the very first patient at that hospital in Springfield with COVID. So you can just imagine, with that severe kind of COVID, he was the first one on a ventilator there. And anyway, they could think of nothing more to do for him. He ended up on a ventilator for over a month, which meant that at best, he should be handicapped. And at worst, he would not be, if he survived it, he might not be right in his mind again. But God did a miracle, and Greg is absolutely healed today. He returned to his job and travels all over the world as before. It's truly a fascinating faith-building story, even for those who have lost loved ones. Greg and Sandy have often said to me, and I think God really directed us to do this book together, because my input helped the book to become something that even those who lost loved ones can also read it, and their faith can grow too. So together, the two of them and me were able to, really, it was God ordained to put this book together, and I think it's really something that I would encourage you to buy. People often ask me, wasn't it hard to write the book when your husband didn't receive the healing here on earth that you had prayed for? It's a valid question. The truth is, God knew exactly what I needed. My faith in God's interest to heal people was shaken after I lost my husband. I still knew God could heal. I just didn't know if he really still wanted to. Like maybe we'd fallen so far that he wasn't doing those kinds of miracles anymore. And I wanted to believe, because if anybody in my family needed prayer, needed healing, I wanted to believe that God still would heal today. But the truth was, when someone in church mentioned a need for healing, I really hoped they wouldn't ask me to be the one to pray for them. So, however, becoming intimately acquainted with Greg and Sandy's journey toward healing helped to restore my faith in God's still healing today. I had to accept that since God didn't heal my husband, he has a different plan that I cannot see now. As a matter of fact, I might not see the fulfillment of that plan until I reach eternity, which means I must continue walking by faith. What I couldn't know at the time was that a couple years later, I would need a miraculous healing too. God knew, and he was preparing my heart. For well over a decade, I have dealt with a disease called Meniere's disease. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it causes debilitating dizziness. And I'm not saying like this dizziness. I'm saying the room spins and you don't know up from down. It's a terrible disease. And I was dealing with that in 2019 and getting it under control, but in early 2020, it was still, I was still having episodes, not quite as severe, but I was still having episodes. And I remember telling my daughter, I hope so much that I die before Dad, because I can't imagine dealing with this disease without him in my life. He was my security and my protector. Thank God the Meniere symptoms were completely under control when Kurt was diagnosed with the cancer, so I was able to care for him without fear of getting any kind of dizzy spell, and that's God's grace for sure. After Kurt died, I asked God to please heal me completely of this disease. I felt it was the least he could do. But 3 years later, at the beginning, that was actually last September, I had my first dizzy spell again. And this time without Kurt. And my son, bless his heart, he took me to the ER because the dizziness hadn't stopped for well over 8 hours. And I had been in intensive care once before for it because it depletes you of all your electrolytes so that there's a danger for seizure. So anyway, I didn't want to fall into that again, so I went to the hospital after 8 hours, and they were able to help me. And I felt so bad. I don't know how it is here, but in Michigan, when you go to the ER, you're going to be there for a long time. And here, my sweet son, with 3 children and a wife, was staying with me in the ER, and I just kept saying, "Thank you so much. I'm so sorry." And he was like, "Mom, for all you did, this is the least I can do," which is so sweet. But anyway, the wonderful thing was, it usually takes a year for me to bring this all into balance again. But God, in his grace and mercy, helped me to get past it in less than a month. And I was completely recovered from that. The negative thing, and this is the part where I needed healing. One of the side effects of Meniere's is something called BPPV, which I can't say the word for. It's a huge 4 words. Ends with vertigo. The V is vertigo. And what it is it causes the crystals to come out of where they are supposed to be. And it happens a lot of times to older people. It happens to people with Meniere's disease. And so with movement, it wasn't that constant, horrible, that lasting dizziness, but it was just when I would move, all of a sudden the room could spin. And just for briefly, or bending down, and all of a sudden, the room is, and you got to hold on to something. So I was dealing with that. It makes it very hard to drive a car. I'm by myself now, okay? So it makes it very hard to drive a car with BPPV. And so I asked God, of course, to heal me. I did home maneuvers. You can do home maneuvers, and it often puts it back in place. It wasn't working. After 2 weeks, I called my doctor, and he had me come in, and he did the maneuver. Didn't work. So he sent me to another one of his offices where they have a special chair where they strap you in, kind of like an electric chair. And they put these goggles over your eyes. You can't see, you have to keep your eyes open because the computer monitors the eye movement to see the dizziness. And they move you upside down, to the side, diagonal, every which way. It's an amusement park ride. And so after all of that, they warn you that you might get sick. I didn't, thank God. But anyway, after all of that, he said, this, it looks like it was successful. It should be better now. Let's see how you do. The next day, it started up again. And I was like, oh God. So I'm looking online, what's next? And it looks like they could do surgery. But any kind of ear surgery is always a danger of losing your hearing. And I just didn't want to go that direction. And so I just asked God, please heal me. And so I'm the women's ministry director at my church. And so we have a regular women's gathering. And during the October Women's Gathering, I was up front with another team member, and we were just making some announcements at the end of the service. And the team member said to me, said to all of us, she says, I really feel in my heart that we should pray for Ann today. You know that she's been dealing with this dizziness for well over a month, so let's ask the Lord to touch her. And so they all agreed, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and they all prayed, and the other people put their hands out to me, and they prayed. It was a simple, beautiful prayer. And then I went on and didn't think about it anymore. I just went, it's terrible. Why is it that we sometimes don't really expect the healing, And yet we're praying, so it's like, God, please just surprise me with a healing. And I went home, thought nothing more of it, and then the next day, halfway through the morning, it occurred to me, I hadn't had any dizziness. So I thought, okay, well, I want to make sure. And so I started moving and doing some challenging the motions that would usually bring it on. Still no dizziness. I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a week before I say anything, just to be sure. And so I waited a week, and still no dizziness. So after that time, I finally started telling people, and after 2 weeks, I canceled the appointment where I was going to meet with my doctor again. I canceled it. And I realized that God had completely healed me of the BPPV, and I haven't had problems with it since. Yes, definitely praise God. I had seen God heal people before. God healed my husband miraculously more than once. God healed my daughter when she was born prematurely through an emergency C-section and hyaline membrane disease and pulmonary hypertension. So I'd seen God do miracles, but I had never personally experienced a miraculous healing in my body. Well, I can't say that anymore. Writing patient number 1 for Greg and Sandy not only helped to restore my faith in God's interest to heal today, it also opened doors for me. Their publisher has given me some editing assignments since then. I'd often thought I'd enjoy being an editor, but wasn't I too old for that? God obviously didn't think so. Another door that God has opened is for me to speak publicly. That's something I never wanted to do. But He's given me a voice through my grief, and doors are opening for me to speak. I don't know what you're going through right now. Perhaps your life is going great. And like a surfer who catches the perfect wave, you're on top of that wave and enjoying the ride. That's great. I am really happy for you, and I know what that feels like because I have been there many times before. And perhaps your life is at a low point today. Maybe you've received terrible news, your health is deteriorating, you've lost a loved one, had to give up on a dream, or perhaps you're dealing with a broken relationship or something else that's really hard to bear. No matter where you are right now in the ups and downs of life, you won't be there forever. Trust God in the high moments and trust God in the low moments, and trust God to open new doors. There are many doctors and nurses who've been ministered to by Christians who were sick and dying, but continued full in their faith and filled with hope. God can use you in whatever circumstance you're in. There are many charitable organizations that were started by people who faced terrible, tragic situations. There are countless memorial funds that were created after the death of loved ones, and countless people are blessed through these funds today. When your darkest moment arrives, don't waste your tragedy by becoming angry with God. Instead, remember who God is. We read in Isaiah 43, and this is a really important passage of scripture to remember, Isaiah 43, verse 9, and then we'll skip to 11 and 12. And it says, "What sorrow awaits those who argue with their Creator? Does a clay pot argue with its maker? Does the clay dispute with the one who shapes it, saying, 'Stop, you're doing it wrong'? Does the pot exclaim, 'How clumsy can you be?' This is what the Lord says, the Holy One of Israel and your Creator. Do you question what I do for my children? Do you give me orders about the work of my hands? I am the one who made the earth and created people to live on it. With my hands, I stretched out the heavens. All the stars are at my command. So, when you find yourself in the darkest moment of your life, where you can't see your way forward, I hope you'll remember this message. Trust God. He is always worthy of your trust, even on your darkest day. He is the light at the end of the long, dark tunnel. If all you're seeing is a flicker of light off in the distance, walk toward it. He's the voice that whispers words of encouragement into your ear. Isaiah 30:21 says, "Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, 'This is the way, walk in it.'" As long as you still have breath, God still has a plan for you on this earth and a job for you to do. May God bless you and be near to you always.